Hello folks, it's me, DeMontropolis, and I'm here introducing another new series to the channel. But don't worry, this game is much smaller in scope compared to Final Fantasy, a game I covered last week. Kirby's Dream Land is a game developed by HAL Laboratory and released in 1992 on the Game Boy. A fun fact about me is that before I was a big Mega Man fan, I was a big Kirby fan. I say was because after doing a marathon across most Kirby games, I got burnt out of the franchise for several years. Over the past couple of months though, I've been getting myself back into Kirby, now with the analytical lens I've acquired from playing so much Mega Man. Before I go into pros and cons though, I found some interesting tidbits about the game's development that I could talk about. So, Kirby initially was just designed as a dummy placeholder character, but the devs grew to like him so much that he decided to keep him as the main character. He was also initially called Po, and the game to be called Po of the Spring Breeze. Sound familiar? Anyway, the reason why Po got his name changed was by Nintendo's suggestion, because it was Nintendo who helped publish the game for HAL, and this suggestion was to help give the character more international appeal. And the name Kirby was chosen to honor a lawyer named John Kirby, who defended Nintendo against a lawsuit from Universal regarding Donkey Kong. It was a whole thing. Lastly, there was a bit of confusion regarding Kirby's color back then. We all know him as pink, but for this game only, American artwork and advertisements made him white based on the game's grayscale. Now, are you ready for the review? I sure am. Time for us to sit back and immerse ourselves into Kirby's Dream Land. The title screen here immediately introduces us to Kirby of the Stars. From all the animations here alone, he's a character with a lot of energy. Stars booming everywhere, the row of Kirbys doing their own set of dances, you'll learn his charm right away. And these expressions aren't just on the title screen. Every time Kirby collects a sparkling star from a boss, he clones himself just so he can dance on them, and each dance is unique to each boss. If you have the game paused for a while, he'll just start dancing on his own. Stars are generally everywhere too. Every time Kirby touches a surface, a star flies out of him. He also uses certain stars as a means of transportation, these being called warp stars. This cute and charming aesthetic also applies to the game's graphics and presentation as a whole. Everything in Dreamland is so pleasant to look at with how well detailed it is. Green Greens definitely has the most iconic look, with all the rolling hills and clouds. It's no wonder this became the definitive Kirby stage. Bubbly Clouds, though, has the most diverse set of backgrounds. You go through these cloudy areas, to these floating castles, to eventually a full view of the galaxy. It's also a nice touch that each stage has its own intro, with Kirby getting himself into some silly shenanigans. It all feels right at home on the Game Boy. This game would also kickstart the series' reputation for its spectacular music. Before we got accustomed to all those insane boss themes, Kirby's Dream Land delivered an OST that was overall lighthearted and bouncy, and it served to the game's benefit. Many songs are still catchy to this day, like Float Islands, the Mint Leaf tune, and the Staff Roll theme. Others, like the title theme, Green Greens, and King DDD's theme, would become immediately recognizable, and rightfully so. If I were to pick a favorite, I would say Bubbly Clouds for how serene it is. The main boss theme is quite good too, underrated even. Let's move on to what Kirby can do. This game introduced his ability to inhale objects and spit them out as a harmful star, a type of combat that gave Kirby a unique and simple flair. When walking across waves of enemies, it's always humorous to eat as many of them as you can and spit them at each other, especially the more harmless ones like Waddle Dees. Poor guys. Against bosses and mid-bosses though, you cannot swallow them, so gameplay shifts into using their own attacks against them. Unfortunately, nothing happens when you swallow enemies, but it is cool that Kirby automatically swallows items like pep drinks and Maxim tomatoes if he chooses to inhale them. Kirby can also fly over obstacles by taking in some air. Since it is infinite, it gives Kirby aerial control to navigate vertical areas, and keeps him safe from difficult platforming and bottomless pits, which is handy because Kirby tends to bump his body against platforms a lot. One common complaint about the Kirby series, though, is that the indefinite hovering can potentially let you skip everything. Thus, it could break the game. Unfortunately, this is actually true for the first two stages, Green Greens and Castle Lololo, where it is possible to beat these stages without engaging any enemies. It is less fun flying over everything though, and I know future games each have their own way of remedying this. Beyond just inhaling, Kirby has a few fancy ways to defeat enemies. To cancel his flying, Kirby releases a puff called the Air Bullet. It travels surprisingly far, and since all enemies die in one hit, it can be very useful as a ranged attack if there are no other enemies to inhale and spit. Particularly, this goes for bloppers, who throw cupcake icing everywhere and makes it tricky to actually inhale him. Or for enemies who cannot be inhaled, like the deceptive Scarfies. And while Kirby cannot kill enemies by jumping on them directly, he can face plant onto them if he falls from a great height, which is a clever way to achieve something similar. But that's pretty much all of Kirby's core mechanics. As such, Kirby's Dream Land feels almost too basic to a fault. You're not really going to be using air bullets and face planting much, so most of the game just boils down to walking forward, inhale, spit, repeat. I also noticed the occasional inputs getting eaten, both for your jumps and for your inhale attack. Granted, it's not disastrous in platforming sections since Kirby can just fly, but more so if you try to do it too quickly after a certain action. It can be a wee bit frustrating at times. In terms of difficulty, Kirby's Dream Land is a near perfect game for beginners due to the game's, well, easy difficulty. It was designed in a way so that anyone could enjoy it, even those who are unfamiliar with 2D platformers. It also helps that the game is short and sweet in length. There are 5 main stages, each roughly lasting 2 to 5 minutes. If you ignore the goodies, you can cut that time down even more. So on average, the full game takes 20 to 30 minutes to beat. While that normally would be a bad thing, each of the stages have something unique going for it and give the game a strong impression. Green Greens is very straightforward of a stage with little to distract you from the enemy combat. Castle Lololo pulls some trickery with rooms that loop forever, an optional branching path, and doors that take you all over the place. Float Islands has 3 main areas and a few rooms where you can find your first 1-ups. Bubbly Clouds is my favorite stage, as it has more hostile enemies like Sir Kibble, but it also has many gimmicky areas that make use of Kirby's flying, and the power-ups he finds along the way. Oh, I should mention, Kirby does not have any copy abilities in this first game, so instead he has to come across these power-up items that give him some extra attacks to do, and they help spice up the gameplay a bit. The mic is a very brief screen nuke, and the bomb lets you unleash a moving explosion. I always thought that one was satisfying. Both the super spicy curry and the mint leaf replace your inhale with fiery breath or unlimited air bullets, briefly turning the game into a run and gun or even a shoot 'em up, specifically for the third boss, Kabula. It's pretty cool stuff, albeit short-lived. This game also introduced Invincibility Candy, one of Kirby's most iconic power-ups. However, it confuses me as to why there is only one candy in the game. Granted, the game is short, but this one candy is tucked away in an optional branching path over at Castle Lololo. Thus, you can miss out on both the candy's power and its unique theme song. It is a bit strange that some stages are very quick to give you health pickups, and I think it's a bit too sudden. I know Green Greens is the first level and all, with having a door marked in to better captivate your interest, but with having 2 pep drinks, each restoring 2 HP, I feel like this room could have been pushed back a bit further. Castle Lololo just baffles me, though. It has a very similar room with 2 pep drinks, but it's even earlier in the stage, and the very small number of enemies aren't even in your way to wear you down. It feels excessive. These levels do have some mind-blowing secrets, though, tucking away very valuable goodies like Maxim tomatoes and 1-ups in them. Now, before I replayed this game after years of playing it, I knew a few of these secrets already, like how Bubbly Clouds had the secret door that led to a mint leaf section where you not only find every goodie, but also these unique enemy patterns who fly around and fire projectiles like a Metal from Mega Man. I also knew about the moon and how you get showered with 1-ups and tomatoes in this large drop, but to be fair, that's pretty much the signature Kirby secret. Every time you see a moon in a Kirby game, you just have to check. However, my jaw dropped upon the discovery of even more secrets that, in all of my knowledge of playing this game, I never stumbled upon until now. Castle Lololo has these question blocks all over that either shoot out Chuckies or mostly do nothing. But there is this one specific question block that summons a Maxim tomato if you stand right next to it. Bubbly Clouds even managed to hide a secret in its curry room, where there's an invisible hole in the ceiling only telegraphed by a pillar stuck inside it. And if you walk all the way back, a 1-up spawns. That is just galaxy brain level design, and another reason why Bubbly Clouds is my favorite stage. The last stage though, Mount DDD, is definitely the weakest in the game. The gimmick of this one is you go through 4 mini stages to fight the 4 main bosses again before you can fight King DDD. It's kinda like the rematches you see in Mega Man games, but the way it is done here is dull and lazily put together. The 4 mini stages have no power-ups or goodies to find, so no health pickups or 1-ups across the entire thing. They also have one instance of each enemy type unique to that stage. Like in Green Greens, you'll only see 1 Cappy, 1 Grizzo, 1 Poppy Bros Jr., and the list goes on. It's as if the game is trying to roll call as many enemies as it can before the mini stage is over. The mini stages themselves have barely anything to offer either. Look at Bubbly Clouds, that's a 5-second drop from top to bottom. One popular Kirby enemy that was introduced here are Gordos. No, they are not fat cats, but they will gore you with their stabby spikes, and are known for being invincible. However, Gordos were made into these very extreme obstacles in this first game, doing 3 bars of damage in the 4 main stages. That's half of Kirby's health, and it's true even in normal mode. They also appear in Mount DDD's mini stages, guarding doors, and the only way to remove them is to touch these other Kirbys that kill every enemy in the room. I mention these Gordos specifically because they are insta-kill if Kirby touches them. That doesn't even make sense. Why? Although I mentioned before that this is an easy game, it can also be a boring one. There are many moments where the game is asking very little of you, and that can create a bit of a bottleneck where some sections of a stage are better than others based on how engaging they are. And I don't mean difficult, there's a difference. The game also lacks depth to Kirby's gameplay mechanics, which can partly add on to why the game can feel a bit too basic and boring at times. Yes, there's the occasional power-up, but Kirby cannot do anything like run or slide, moves that are subtle that add a sense of momentum and burst of energy to the gameplay. There's nothing noteworthy about water physics, you just boop up as a way of swimming. There's not even that mechanic where inhaling 2 objects at once upgrades the star spit into a stronger projectile that pierces. Nothing along those lines. Thankfully, this game has a mode called Extra Game, which adds a deceptively good challenge for experienced veterans. You learn the combination after beating normal mode, and what this does absolutely makes it worth the playthrough. The stages do not have their layouts touched, but all the enemies are either souped up in their movement speed or replaced with completely unique enemies that are more erratic and do more damage. In fact, there's a lot of enemies unique to this mode and only this mode of this game, never to appear again in another Kirby game. Like these boomerang dudes named Boomer, or the floating children called Benny. That must mean that floating children in this country can double as thieves, so I guess it isn't too bad that Kirby is just murdering and consuming them without much thought. Mid-bosses and bosses are also souped up too, but I will get into them later. Beating Extra Game also nets you the final reward that is configuration, to do whatever you want. However, I think the difficulty gap between normal mode and Extra Game is a little too large. While I think Extra Game is not actually as hard as people make it out to be, there are some bits that can be genuinely unfair and a bit too precise. So you have normal mode that can feel too slow and boring, then you have Extra Game that may possibly push your buttons too far at points, like the falling stars and bubbly clouds actually doing damage. Not well balanced is what I'm getting at. Excluding the Extra Game patterns, the 3 mid-bosses in this game succumb to that pitfall of boring. Poppy Bros Sr. can be defeated without having to move Kirby at all from where he first lands, with no move forcing him to do so. In fact, a common theme all these mid-bosses share is that they just offer their objects to Kirby, basically feeding him his ammunition. When playing an extra game though, their patterns do become more interesting to dodge, but anytime I'm not playing on extra game, I have to sit through these dull patterns, twiddling my thumbs. While only having 5 main bosses, Kirby's Dream Land would establish many familiar faces that the series would be known for. Wispy Woods is perfect first boss material. As a tree, he cannot move, and that makes it easier for players to hit him. He also teaches the player about both attack blind spots with his own air puffs, and being on the lookout for projectiles that can come from many areas. In this case, it's his famed apples. Lololo and La 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 would introduce a recurring boss template of enemies traveling across multiple floors, and the unpredictable Caraco adapts to how close or far you are from him. Thus, you can either play it safe and let him come to you, which may risk those Waddle-Doos using their beam attack, or be as close as you can to react to his quick swoops. While the extra game patterns of the bosses are well thought out, especially Wispy Woods, the fight with Kabula is the most cheap and unfair challenge the game has to offer. Her speed is amped up tremendously, and her cannonballs actually home in on Kirby. Given that she has a random attack choice, this makes it insanely hard to predict and dodge her attacks. All I do is just move back and forth and hope for the best, though there are times where I have beaten her without taking damage, on accident. Thankfully, if you keep laying down the damage, the fight doesn't last long enough that you'll eventually die from all the cheap damage. The final boss is the nemesis who forced Kirby's hand, King DDD. He's a large, gluttonous penguin who apparently wasn't gluttonous enough, because the king and his thieves have stolen all the food in Dreamland and the sparkling stars used to harvest them. It was this game that introduced us to DDD's selfish motives, especially with how luxurious he must feel living in that castle in a mountain isolated high above Dreamland. Even if you go through this game without knowing the plot, once you see Kirby lift his castle into the air and drop all that food across the land, you can figure it out. I also like the detail of that castle changing its eyes from angry to depressed once its king gets thrown out of his home. Regarding the boss fight, King DDD definitely has the best fight in the game. Although it's very simple compared to future DDD battles, he gives you much to react to, especially in extra game where he moves even faster. He's got a very beefy health bar, and knows how to inhale just like Kirby. I also like that even though his slide tackle and inhale have the same telegraph, you can still tell which one he's going to do if you pay close attention. He's also got a trusty hammer and heavy jumps, and with both of these, he's the first ever boss who generates stars from his attacks. It's especially fun when he does a long chain of jumps and keeps creating stars for you to wear him down, up until you deliver that sweet final blow. So, we've ended our run with 15 pros and 12 cons. At times, Kirby's Dream Land definitely feels like a prototype that could have been fleshed out a bit more. In terms of presentation, this game has it all figured out though, and I applaud the effort that went into that. Though, while the normal mode experience may be very easygoing, it can also be a rather dull one with very little depth. There really isn't much to offer on repeat playthroughs, so extra game ends up having to pull a lot of weight there. Yes, you are getting the best of both worlds with these two difficulties, sort of, but I still think it could have been fine-tuned better. So with that, I'm going to give Kirby's Dream Land a rating of 6 out of 10. Decent. Well, that's the end of this review. If you like what you saw, consider giving a like and subscribe to my channel. Leave a comment if you have something to say. And as per usual, my Discord server, DeMontropolis, is in the description, so consider joining if you're new to the channel. With 2024 coming to a close, this might probably be the last review I make this year, unless I pull another wacky miracle like with Final Fantasy. Still, I give a formal thank you to those who have stuck around for this long, and to those who are new to my content. It's been a very productive year, and who knows how 2025 will come along. And with that said, I'll be signing off. Take care, folks.